Okay, tonight's class is dedicated to Nishmas Bila Bas Devorah Avraham. Should also point out that today was the yahrzeit of Rabbi Yoel Kahn. Rabbi Yoel Kahn was the redactor of the Rebbe's teachings. He is the one who prepared them for print. So all that we have, we owe a tribute to him. We are learning this mimer, and today we're going to finish the mimer. And just to refresh and get everybody back on the page, the story that we're working off of, and this is the framework of a mimer. We have a story out of Chumash, or wherever its origin is, and then we take it from there and we try to use it as an entry point into a more personal understanding. So the story is actually two stories. The story is the first story is the story in the Chumash. It's also referenced in this week's Parsha, which is a trailer for tomorrow night Parsha class, is the story of the spies. You recall that after the Jewish people arrived at the cusp of Eretz Yisrael, this is after they corrected things post the golden calf, the building of the Mishkan, etc. They came to Moshe and they said, wouldn't it be a wise thing if we sent in some scouts just to figure out if, and that was the problem, we can conquer the land. Moshe accedes. 10 of the 12 spies come back with such a disparaging report that the Yidden wind up the 40-year decree of wandering. Fast forward 40 years, Joshua, Moshe's successor and one of the two surviving spies, he is now in charge. Moshe has died, and they're standing there basically in the same spot. And he sends in two spies. And you think, what are you doing, Joshua? Why are you sending in spies? We know how this ends. It's bad. But his spies come back with an encouraging report and, in fact, become a crucial part of the entry of the Jewish people into the land of Israel. So the question we ask is, what is the difference between them? So again, at this point, we sort of depart from the literal part of the story, and we start to understand it as metaphor and an entryway into understanding how it is that we can conquer our land of Israel, which is representative of ourselves, that is filled with, like the land of Israel at the time, hostile nations that don't want godliness being brought to them. And we, as human beings, are a compound of our human instincts, buy me, take me, get me, and our spiritual instincts, which is to be selfless, to get over our individual wants, needs, and perks, and instead to pursue the transformation of the world into a godly place. And so, sending of spies represents the pursuit of identifying the aspects within ourselves and how they can be rescued or transformed or protected from animalistic impulses, and can instead be directed towards the service of something greater than self. And so we see that one of the primary differences between Moshe's spies who failed and Joshua's spies who succeeded is that Moshe's spies were sent to scout out all 7, and that's the key word here, of the occupying tribes, the 7 nations who were in the land of Israel. In contrast, Joshua's spies were only sent to spy out the 3 perimeter tribes on the edge, the border of the land of Israel. So the number 7 and the number 3 have a lot of significance. Again, we've now switched to the sort of metaphoric interpretation. And 7 represents the 7 innate characteristics that we have that are identifiable as a means of expression of who we are. We call them in Hebrew the 7 spheros. It's like the English word sphere. They're identifiable aspects. Our neshama is infinite. So how do we talk about it? We can't talk about the infinite. We need to have some portals of entry. We need to have some tags placed on them so that we can have some comprehension. We reference them based on a pasuk in the book of Chronicles that has been incorporated into our daily service, sometimes even twice when we take the Torah out. We talk about the 7 characteristics as amoral, not immoral. That is, they are tools. If we use them in a godly way, they are godly. If we use them in a self-serving way, they are selfish. So, for example, the first is the limitless expanse. So if I'm kind to everybody, that's a godly way. If I have no boundaries, that's an ungodly way. We talk about gevura, restraint. If I restrain myself from reacting, gossiping, that's a godly thing. If I restrain myself from being helpful, that's ungodly. So they are neutral, like tools, and they are utilized by either the godly soul or the self-serving animalistic soul. Moshe Rabbeinu set out his spies and he said, I want you to go and seek out these 7 characteristics, and I want you to make sure that they are only capable of being good. That is, not only that we only do good, but that we can so uproot the negative aspect that we can transform these tools into being godly. Now, we do this, again, using a little imagination, we do this when we take a physical object and we consecrate it into something spiritual. So, for example, a contrast. If we take a pencil and I write nice things, at the moment, I'm using the pencil for nice things. Of course, tomorrow I could use the pencil to write nasty things. So the pencil hasn't been changed. I've utilized it. In contrast, if I take a piece of animal skin and I turn it into a Torah, it has now permanently been transformed into something that is only godly. It has now been completely rescued from any capacity for it to be grasped by self-servingness and selfishness. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu set his people out to do. And we can't do it. Most of us cannot only be interested in the good. That is, does God expect us to be perfect? Well, yes, in the behavior, in the execution of what we do, but not in our innate identity. That I may still be a late sleeper, even if I set the alarm and get up on time. In contrast, Joshua told his spies that go and seek out the 3. The 3 represent the 3 methods through which we express ourselves. And the Kabbalistic metaphor is garments, clothing. When we put on clothing, we express ourselves. We announce ourselves to the community. We announce ourselves to other people by our clothing. But we realize that it's only clothing. I am not the suit. I am enclosed in the suit, and it sends a certain message. And I can dress up as a policeman, but it doesn't make me a policeman. But when I utilize my 3 garments, my 3 modes of expression, which are what I willfully and consciously think about, not maybe what pops into my head, but what I voluntarily concentrate on, what I verbalize, because I can choose what I say, and what I do. That, Joshua said, is where we can be successful. So, can we become good people? Maybe not. I may always be lazy, stingy, and selfish. Can we transform ourselves to do good things? Yes, that we can do. So to say, well, I'm an angry person, so that I get angry at people. No. I'm an angry person. I got to work on that. But that's not an excuse for acting out on my anger. So Joshua's spies had a lesser expectation. And it is in part the difference between who Moshe Rabbeinu was. He was that way. He was only interested in godly things. And so, like a great artist, he said, well, why can't you just be like that? Only be interested in godly things. And Joshua said, that's not something that we can expect from people. What we can expect, though, is that they only do, and by do, I mean willfully think about, speak, and perform godly things. So now we start to say that this is also one of the reasons why it is more profound in Jewish life. It is more emphasized on what we do. And again, when I say what we do, I'm including what we willfully think about, what we say, and what we do, than on our character. Now, this touches on an ongoing debate within the culture of Jewish life, Torah life. Are we aspiring to our virtue, or are we aspiring to the execution of behaviors? We all know that Chabad is probably, most famous for, are you Jewish? Shake the lulav and esrog, light the candles, put on tefillin. Now, does that make me a tefillin wearer? I don't know. In the moment, I'm putting on tefillin. Why don't we say to the person, are you Jewish? Be good. Rid yourself of desires for anything other than the God. We like that. That it's an aspiration, and we're not saying one and not the other. Where is the emphasis? And Hasidus really comes down strongly at the emphasis is on the mitzvah action. And that it becomes a mechanism as we put on tefillin, we put on tefillin, we put on tefillin. You know what? We not only put on tefillin, we become tefillin wearers. But it may be a struggle every day. I mean, I know of people who have been putting on tefillin for years, and every morning it's a struggle, like exercise or any other behavior changer. It may not be intuitive to them. Even, the outsider says, oh, it's easy for you. It's easy for you to do it. It's hard for me. Everybody might be struggling. And this is the idea that what we demand primarily from people and what our focus is on the execution, conscious thought, spoken word, executed behavior. That is, again, it's not one instead of the other, but that is where the emphasis is more than on the character, more than on whether or not I am a good person, do I do good things? And this helps us understand by what we explain, the idea that the garments, what happens when we put on the garments? Now, on the one hand, when we put on the garments, let's say we think about talis and tefillin, or something that is perhaps a little less dramatic, we put on our Shabbos clothing. We put on our garments. We live up to those garments. We recognize that we represent something. Last night we had the chaplain on. We talk about when you're in full uniform, it somehow evokes a certain characteristic. So the garments in that sense are higher than the person himself. And here it leads into a real fascinating idea. We know that Hashem invests a part of himself in us. That's the neshama. And we ask, why does Hashem send the neshama down into this world? The neshama certainly doesn't want to come down here. Like we read that we are born against our will. The neshama, what do I want to go down there for? I like it up in heaven. So on the one hand, we say, yes, the neshama has what we call mesiras nefesh. It has devotion. And it says, you know what? I'd rather stay up in heaven. But the world needs to be transformed. And if we don't send neshamas down into this world, the world is just going to be a place where everybody's out to kill each other. So I'm willing to sacrifice my personal spiritual comfort to go down into the dark, deep physical world to do you a favor. That is one attitude. Chassidus takes a very startling counter attitude. It says that the neshama, although it's an actual spark of God, can become closer to God by coming down here into this physical world, because the tug of war is on over the garments. Who is going to take control of what I consciously think about, say, and do? My godly soul or my self-serving human animating soul? If the godly soul takes control of it, not only does it elevate my thoughts to be godly thoughts, my words to be godly, my actions to be godly, the neshama itself becomes elevated. The neshama itself becomes that much closer to Hashem. We've all experienced this, I'm sure. We think we're going to help somebody else. Take a simple example. You're going to help somebody with their homework. So you think, aren't I a nice person? I could be studying myself. Instead, I'm going to take an hour and I'm going to devote it to helping somebody else with their homework. And what do we wind up consequently with? That I understand the material better by having taught it to somebody. You want to know if you understand material? Try teaching it to a 5-year-old. Not only will you have to work hard to make it understandable to that child, you will discover yourself being that much more in mastery of the data through your capacity and your experience of explaining it to a child. Well, this is perhaps a way that we can understand that the neshama, when it gets into the garment, when it has to deal with the humanity, it says, I don't want to deal with people. You know what people are. They're selfish and petty and so on. They want to eat and drink and sleep and so on. They don't want to be spiritual. Okay, I'll do you a favor. So the neshama thinks he's doing us a favor, which of course he is. And yet the neshama finds itself that much more intensely aligned with the infinity of Hashem than it would have had it stayed up in Shemayim. In contrast, of course, the animalistic soul can take control of what we think about, what we say, and what we do, and can drag us down to a level that is worse than our natural intuition. This is the distinctive capacity of a human being. The Mimer doesn't mention this, but as a way perhaps to help us understand it. When we go back to the creation story, we find an anomaly. Every other creation, God said, let there be light, there was light. And that light is the same light today as it was 5,700 years ago. The trees are the same, the animals are the same. When it came to human beings, God first formed the body out of dust, the least evidently godly entity. And then he blew the breath of life into its nostrils. So you have a body into which Hashem puts a neshama. And therefore, human beings are the only creation that can change, that can grow, that can do tshuva, that can correct its past. The animal just goes about its day. It lives, it doesn't do bad things. Animals are not cruel. If a lion eats a zebra, it's what they do. It doesn't make him cruel. It's simply what he does. Human beings are the only creation that are not simply programmed to do what they do like a tree. We have the capacity to do amazing things beyond what our simple programming would. That's how we build hospitals. That's why we do kindness. That's why we are giving and thoughtful and so forth. We also, on the other hand, could do worse. We could be cruel and petty and violent, etc., which an animal will not be. So now we understand that Hasidus comes down very decisively on this side of the argument. And again, it's not one to the exclusion of the other. The primacy is on the mitzvah actions, the aseh toiv and the sur me'ra, the pursuit of good and the avoidance of evil. Even if I'm a bad guy, I might be, it's to put it this way, there is no sin called being a bank robber. It's okay to be a bank robber, just don't rob banks. The fact that I have the impulse for it, I may never be able to change that. Moshe Rabbeinu said, go out and seek your character and make yourself a good person. Yehoshua said, you know what, that's a little too aspirational for us. I'll tell you what, go out and do good things. And when you do good things, the neshama will benefit as well. So again, yes, we should certainly take time to contemplate and try and uproot the negative characteristic. Our primacy should be focused on, and what is accomplishable is to think, speak, and do the right thing. And we can avoid that disappointment that the spy said, we can't do this. We can't become good and not be interested in anything else. And now we understand that when Yehoshua sent his Meraglim, his scouts, to Yericho, to the border of Eretz Yisrael, he said, that's what we need to. We need the border where the rubber meets the road, where we interact, where our neshama interacts with the world. That's where it decides the garments. It decides what it's going to think about, what it's going to say, and what it's going to do. And through this, we will ultimately, yes, we will in fact conquer, that is, take full control, not only over our expression, over our essential character, through the dominance, starting with the behavior. Like I said before, we put on tefillin, but you become a tefillin putter honor. You become an early riser. You become kind. You're kind, you become kind. You're generous, you become generous. You're thoughtful, you become thoughtful. So this helps us understand why Yehoshua did send out the spies and why his spies succeeded where Moshe's didn't, in part because Moshe was a little too aspirational. Maybe he had a little too high hopes, whatever his calculation was, because he's at the Moshe Rabbeinu perspective, like the great artist who thinks that everyone else can be a great artist, sometimes maybe a little too humble. And his protege and successor, Yehoshua, who experienced it himself, realized, you know what, maybe we won't be able to conquer all 7 of our characteristics. What we can take control of is the 3, which is what we think about, what we say, and what we do. This concludes the Mimer. Yashar Koach to everybody. We finished the Mimer. Tomorrow night, we'll talk some Parsha. We'll see you then. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.